Can I start?
Okay, ready? Yeah. 3, 2.
So what do we say for the HLA? Why we took part?
Don't move chin.
It's alright, I'm just going to stop.
Just when you end it.
Don't look away.
Yeah,
That is not going anywhere.
Just another day at the office.
Hi, I'm no.
Most important thing is what I've learned from the HLA and adapting it and moving forward and making sure, you know, I make use of it. The reason why I don't know what to say now. If I make a mistake, can I just take a pause and then start again?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Don't really know what to say. Don't record this.
I've really enjoyed it. I've learned so much, and I've really benefited from. Oh God, what have I benefited from? Oh.
Okay.
Is that it's been a fantastic. Oh no, I've lost it.
Can you give me a countdown?
I don't know how much to gesticulate. How much? It's quite a mellow person. I don't know.
I'm ready.
Thank you.
Okay, I think I'll chop and add some things. We're looking forward to seeing you. Bye-bye.
Hello, welcome to HLA Live. HLA Live is our regular broadcast on the HLA YouTube channel as well as all the other social media channels. Each week we talk to interesting people from across the HLA community.
Good evening everyone. I am really excited to be chairing tonight's meeting.
Hi, I'm Rosie Spooner and I'm hosting HLA Live this Wednesday.
And I'm an HLA Scholar and I'm also going to be your host this evening.
To share with us their ideas and their innovations and hopefully bring them to a global audience.
Quite quick, we have ideas, let's do this, let's do that, so...
Many of the topics come from our community, with scholars and faculty expressing an interest in many of the discussions that we're about to have.
Hello everyone and welcome to the HLA Live session on widening participation in the postgraduate realm.
Homelessness and health.
Addiction and the new normal.
HLA programmes are built on 6 pillars. The leader is an innovator and entrepreneur. The leader is a communicator. The leader is a manager. The leader as a negotiator. The leader is a follower. And the leader is a philosopher. If you are interested in becoming a HLA scholar, why not get in contact? Many of the episodes in HLA Live will cover one or more of these important pillars. The HLA team consists of Pedra, Eamon, Tim, Riddy, Alistair, Adil and Trisha, and a range of other HLA scholars and faculty. In episode 32 of HLA Live, we're talking about how COVID shaped my leadership journey, hosted by Adelina Mcleod.
Hello everyone and welcome to this HLA Live episode, looking at leadership and the effects that COVID has had on leadership journeys. I have with me today Dr. Hannah Baird, who is an emergency medicine ST4 trainee. She's currently the National Medical Director Fellow, and she's the Chair of the Faculty of Medical Leadership and Management. Welcome, Hannah.
Hi, thanks for inviting us this evening.
We also welcome Dr. Simon Fleming, who is a London-based orthopaedic doctor, and he is Vice Chair of the Academy of Medical Royal College's Trainee Doctors Group and a past President of the British Orthopaedic Association. Welcome, Simon.
Thank you for having me.
And finally, we welcome Dr. Anna Olsson-Brown, who is a Senior Trainee in Medical Oncology based in Liverpool, and she's Chair of the Academy of Medical Royal College's Trainee Doctors Group. Welcome, Anna.
Thank you.
So to start off this session today, I was wondering whether we could start with Hannah, and if you could just discuss how COVID impacted on your leadership journey so far.
Yeah, so I guess thinking about my leadership journey through COVID probably actually started right when COVID started, because I just moved into ST4, which for emergency medicine means running the department overnight. You do things during the day, but that's the kind of big change, and certainly for me the kind of biggest leadership challenge that I'd faced. Despite doing different roles in other settings, that was definitely the most stressful, and starting that at a point where COVID hit was a huge challenge. I think from the first aspect, from a really kind of personal perspective of how I managed myself, I was suddenly very aware that I wasn't just responsible for my own well-being. I was responsible for the department, for the juniors, and kind of physically managing that day to day, and well, night to night. I really kind of induced huge amounts of anxiety in me, which was something that I'd never really suffered or kind of concerned myself particularly with before. And I think the kind of main leadership lesson I learned with that was that actually it's so important to recognise in yourself when you're starting to get a little bit anxious and think about the impact that that's having on other people. I remember one night shift, one of the patients came up and asked for a mask. It was the time where we weren't kind of wearing masks everywhere. And there was it was exactly at the time where there was concerns about PPE. And I was quite sharp with the patient, and I said, no, I'm afraid they're just for medical staff. And then it was one of the juniors who was sat next to me who said, and it's just explained to the patient. I said, actually, it's, at the minute they're just for medical staff. You're in a non-COVID area, it's safe. And just took the time to explain to him. And I felt so ashamed of myself that actually I'd been quite snappy. And it was only after that I started to reflect that that was all the pressure of the situation that was getting to me and really impacting how I was, and as the leader that night and on that department, I kind of would hold myself to a higher accountability. So that was very much a kind of really early first lesson for me, that actually the first step in all of this is about managing yourself and recognizing where you have impact on others and how much that can kind of trickle and affect others. It's kind of since that moment, I took a lot more time to, check in that I was okay, and to kind of start thinking about, how I came across. And I really kind of changed my mindset at that point. And I think that dictated kind of how I felt my leadership journey went for the next few months in that setting. But that was lessons that I tried to take out of A&E as well, so into other roles that I took. So again, not expecting that everybody's on the same page all the time. So we all had peaks and troughs. We all had moments where we were really busy, but then also perhaps moments when we were at home and less busy for whatever reasons, and just making sure that you always gauge things for different people rather than ever making assumptions that everyone's feeling the same as you. I think from a kind of second leadership lessons point of view was actually seeing those people around me. I took amazing comfort from seeing how my seniors acted, and actually in a weird way how they acted in getting us involved. So being able to step forward and offer sometimes challenge to them. There was certain times where I think our practices weren't particularly safe, and being in an environment that you could say that and offer that challenge, I think was really quite powerful. That they created that narrative, whereas I think unfortunately there are lots of instances where that isn't often the case. And I think COVID has created more of a space for junior trainees to be able to speak up, and most importantly I think it's created more of an opportunity for senior clinicians and management to listen to the juniors, because they actually really needed their thoughts and their opinions at this time. So I think those are kind of two things. In terms of kind of again going back to a kind of more personal thing, I was due to start this fellowship in September, so there was a lot of anxiety if it was going to happen. So I've gone from a full-time frontline clinical role to working from home, which wasn't something that I signed up for. So I love being around people, and I personally found it quite challenging suddenly working from home. But again, it's about making sure that you display yourself still in the kind of right way. So even though I hate being on screen, I make sure I have my camera on for every single meeting that I have, because it's polite, and that's the only way that you're going to create those interactions with people. I think again, in terms of kind of lessons from a COVID perspective, is it's really demonstrated how the system works, sometimes where there's flaws in the system, but actually when people can work together, how well they've worked together. And again, that's on a local level that we've seen within departments, but I think we've really seen it across, you know, some of the different organisations. And I think this is where, you know, Anna and Simon will be able to speak a lot more to this, but that kind of more collaborative approach, or certainly it feels has been taken, I think is a real kind of leadership lesson that we all kind of need to move forward. We can't lose the momentum that COVID has outlined in that. And I think, again, going back to kind of more local levels, I think trainees have actually started to understand why there's a need sometimes for some of the governance and systems that are in place. Perhaps there's often too much red tape, but some of the kind of publications and some of the interviews that have been conducted and surveys have seen trainees talk about, actually for the first time I understood why we have a protocol on this and why this needs to be checked out by this person and this person. And it isn't often something that actually we've ever really kind of had the need to understand. I know personally it was the first time I've ever read the emails that came through from a trust, but actually I did. Every week I read those emails, and I was actually really comforted by the messages from the CEO telling us what was going on. And again, I think that engagement and that collaboration between lots of different people in different areas has just been such a great kind of leadership lesson.
Thank you so much for sharing your story, Hannah. I think just to pull a few things from what you've said, you started off talking about how your journey was very much about you and realising the impact that you can have on people. And I think I also empathise with that as well. Over the past couple of years, my leadership journey has, I think, more been about reflecting on myself and keeping myself healthy and happy so that I can support other people. And I don't think I really appreciated that until I was really tested, and I think COVID has been a huge test of that. I love that you brought out the collaboration and engagement that you have experienced as a result of the pandemic, and I think that that is something that many of us have experienced, and it's been a real positive. And I think lots of people reflect on the fact that that collaborative approach needs to not lose momentum. We can't go back to siloed thinking or siloed working again, because it's just not what is right for our patients or ourselves, really. So I'm really pleased that that came out. And I also think about the way in which your senior team adopted a culture where you could challenge, because I think for a patient safety point of view, having the ability to challenge in a way that is safe is incredibly important for any organisation. So it's great that you had that experience. Thank you for sharing, Hannah. If it's okay to move on to Dr. Simon Fleming now, for your perspectives on how COVID has changed your leadership journey. Thank you, Simon.
I mean, I guess the first thing to say is to echo a lot of what Hannah said. To be fair, the well-being impact of COVID personally and professionally has just been huge. I was reflecting on this earlier today, speaking to a friend. It sounds like a really cheerful conversation. We're talking about moral injury, but some of the feelings I've had personally are around shame and guilt during the pandemic. So I am out of program at the moment, doing my PhD. And so I have done what I guess we're still calling frontline work, both as a locum registrar, and I was redeployed for a short while to the London Nightingale. And I've been as busy as I can be supporting Anna and the work of the Academy with COVID, but I am continuously feeling like I could always do more. And like there's always more of me to give. And it is only because of the support networks that I have that I don't. Because if I was unlimited, if someone allowed me to do all the things that I felt I needed to do, I probably would be far more burnt out than I already am. And I think I'm very aware that I am in that place, because I've also still been doing my PhD and I'm very aware that we as physicians are very prone to setting ourselves on fire to keep other people warm. And I think COVID has really highlighted that that's actually just not a tenable business model. It wasn't before the pandemic, and it really isn't now. I am old and have been at this for quite a while. My leadership journey started years and years and years and years ago. Ironically, I started to really step up my leadership roles with BOTA and other organizations during the junior doctor strike. So I started in crisis, and I'm going to end during a crisis. And the ideas around, in a crisis, it's actually really heartening to see the collaborative stuff come out. And I think it's going to be so important to keep that work going. What has changed for me this year, because aside from the drastic increase in the number of and frequency of the meetings I've had, is just the challenge of making some really difficult decisions. And the challenge of making really difficult decisions where there is no right answer. There is only the least worst option. So when I talk about my COVID experience, I talk about when it started. So my first COVID meeting was the 30th of January. And I will never forget it, because I was meant to be at the academy deputizing for Anna in a meeting about curriculums. And I'm the med-ed guy, and I was fully prepared for the med-ed meeting. And they said, look, we're really sorry. This bloke is going to be giving us a briefing. He's called Chris Whitty. You may or may not know who he is, but he's the chief medical officer, and he's going to tell us about what's going on in China and in Italy and kind of mainland Europe. And I was like, yeah, sure. And everyone was sort of waiting for the curriculum bit to start. And then Chris Whitty gave us our first briefing, where we talked about, you know, if this virus has a 1 to 2% mortality, and if it goes the way we fear it might, we could be looking at millions dead. And I was so mentally, cognitively, and emotionally unprepared for someone dialing in to say things like that, and to have those conversations quite seriously about that. And then, of course, to use the COVID bingo, everything ramped up, and suddenly we were in meetings around issues around trainee well-being, issues around selection, exams, progression, the bread and butter of elected trainee representation, like the things that keep training ticking over. And we were having to make these really difficult decisions where the best option still wasn't great. It was just better than all the alternatives. And the challenge not only of making those decisions and of being able to kind of live with yourself, because you know that these decisions are going to impact trainees' lives, their friends, their families, partners, colleges, service provision, patient care, but also the challenge of communicating those decisions to people, and knowing that with the best will in the world, and with all the webinars and HLA lives and Twitter followers in the world, there are still going to be people who are angry and upset. And actually, part of my personal leadership role this year, I've perceived it to be, is about helping, it sounds grandiose, but it isn't, helping as many people as possible through what I perceive to be the grief cycle. Because we all started kind of in denial, like, this is just fine, it's all going to go away, don't worry, like it's the flu. And a lot of people got stuck around the anger stage, because so much that has happened around COVID has been about loss, whether it's loss of structure, loss of identity, loss of opportunities, loss of training, loss of whatever. loss of friends, family, colleagues, and certainly as a trainee advocate, I guess it's been that difficult balance to walk of advocating for trainees when you're in the room, and then communicating that to people who are going through potentially the worst times they will ever experience, and saying, by the way, I'm really sorry, but this is what your exams are going to look like, or this is what your selection is going to look like, and this is why, and I know it's awful, and I'm sorry, and it was the best I could do. And of course there's that bit of like, and even I feel it's not good enough, but I just couldn't do better, with all the will in the world and all the help and support in the world. So there's been a big part of my leadership journey this year that's taught me around communicating, and that sort of vulnerable leadership of just holding your hands up and going, I have done my best, and I have worked with people who are far better and smarter than me, and they have done their best, and it still looks like this.
I think that, some of that is just things can't happen because there is a pandemic, and we can't change the fact that there is a pandemic going on. And sometimes as a leader, you have to accept that the win is actually that you've mitigated some of the loss.
Yeah.
And that's just where you are. And I think as well, for many of us, our COVID journeys, I think, started way before many of our colleagues. I have the date in my phone. Mine started at the very beginning of March, and that's because Anna texted me saying, "What's RCP doing, talking to you about COVID?" And then very quickly emails were sent. I spoke to the president and said, "I think we're going to have to cancel exams and this, that, and the other." And within about 3 or 4 weeks, all of the stuff that I sent on the email, one way or another, was answered.
Yeah.
And that was really hard. And for me, I think I was told on a Friday evening that the exams were going to be cancelled. I had to sit on that all weekend, couldn't tell anyone. And then obviously the news broke on the Monday, and the best I could do was prepare emails to explain and social media stuff to explain and just help people through. But I do reflect that. I've had great support from colleagues, but sometimes the leadership journey is lonely.
Yeah.
Can be at times.
Yeah, definitely.
So thank you very much. I think quite a lot of sobering thoughts in your journey, Simon, but I think really useful to hear, and thank you for sharing those. So finally, to Anna Olsson-Brown. Myself and Anna are actually very good friends, and she used to be the chair of the Royal College of Physicians Edinburgh Trainee and Members Committee, which I now chair. So it's an absolute delight to chat to you today, Anna, and just tell us about your journey.
Thanks, Addie. So I think it's a privilege to go last in this trio, to be honest. I think there's been some really phenomenal insights so far, and I think one of the things about being a trainee leader, if you like, is that it's a very quick, very fast-paced, evolving job, and it is a job. It requires a degree of professionalism. It requires time, and it's something that you get better at or you develop within during that journey. And we all normally do it as a hobby in our spare time rather than learning how to play golf. So it's one of those things that I think when we started on this journey, I had already been in a number of trainee leadership positions, as I think we all do. And I think, you start out as a young, fresh-faced trainee, starting to do some representation stuff, and over time those roles get bigger and you represent more people and you develop a series of skills. When I took over from the past chair of the Academy Trainee Doctor Group, I certainly hadn't anticipated that a global pandemic was going to be the thing that structured my tenure as chair. And I think it will be the thing that structures my tenure of chair for the whole of my tenure, because I don't think this is going anywhere particularly quickly. I think it's quite interesting about how it's changed over the course of the last year, and will continue to change over the course of the next year. And one of the things that I think is really amazing is the call to arms that trainees in representative roles have really answered. I actually think it's amazing the call to arms that trainees have answered. And I think that it is actually not as widely recognised as I think it should be, that we make up a large proportion of frontline staff and we've just cracked on. We've come back from training posts, we've let go opportunities that we had, we've come out of research and gone back into posts even if we weren't going to get paid or if that wasn't clear at the beginning. And so I think being a representative leader in this time has actually started with recognising what a phenomenal workforce we represent. And trainees do, by and large, just crack on. And it's an amazing privilege to represent them. I think one of the things that has become amazingly clear is that the people on my committee, including all of you, have really rallied and recognised that for trainees to have a voice in the rooms that we now have a voice in, we need to be there. We need to be representing all of the views of all of the different groups of trainees that are involved in training. And I don't think I ever really realised the difference and the variation in the views within trainees, and how important it is to be able to confidently and clearly represent all of them. And that is actually quite a challenge, and one that I've learned to do more effectively over the last year. And I came from a physicianly background. I'm a physician by background, and I very much identify not only as a physician, but I actually identify as an oncologist. So I am quite pigeonholed by my very existence, as I think we all are. But that's not what my role is as a leader. I'm not an oncologist in those rooms. I am a trainee, and I am a representative of all of those voices. And they often have very different needs. And I think it's been really important, and one of the things that I've really tried to focus on during this leadership time is making sure that when I'm in a room with particular groups, whether that be SEBs, HEE, GMC, whoever I'm in a room with, I think it's really important that always the message is one size does not fit all. And actually groups of trainees have been affected by this pandemic in completely different ways. What is true is that we're all quite tired and we're all quite fatigued, and our ability to accept things and to see the best of things is diminished compared to how it was when we started this time last year. But it's not through a desire not to be like that, not to be accepting and not to be helpful, but actually it's just quite a long time to experience life that is not what we would consider normal. And so I think when you go into a meeting and people are quite brusque and they're desperate to make a decision, that cannot be taken personally. And it's really important to recognise that the people you're in a meeting with are in exactly the same position. They're also tired, they're also fatigued. They've also been trying to fix this for the last year, and this virus just is not going away in the way that we would have liked it to. So I think that's one of the important things I've learned about making sure that I represent all of the views and actually give different angles for different views. You know, is it that the pandemic has been a problem because you haven't got access to enough of the procedures that you need to learn how to do? Or is it because actually, although it looks from the outside you've been doing lots and lots of stuff and you've been super busy, and you have you actually got a really narrow spectrum of experience at the moment because you've only been seeing realistically one type of patient? Or is it just that you've been redeployed, so you're meant to look after children and now you're looking after adults, and that's not the same thing? Or is it just it's been really uncertain and you've tried to carry on with your training, but at any given moment you could be moved or you could be put on a COVID rota? Or is it you just couldn't do the things you were meant to be doing? Were you meant to be writing up a PhD, or were you meant to be sorting out a fellowship, and because of the pandemic you haven't been able to do any of those things? The impact of this pandemic has been very variable. And it's important when we go into those meetings with those people that we think about the contingencies for all of those people, not just the trainee person that I started as and I am in my normal day-to-day life. I think the other thing is that working with seniors has really been important, partly because trainees are actually referred to. I've been invited, and our committee has been invited to sit on more panels and committees and working groups than ever before. And I find that a personal, you know, I'm really so pleased that the ATTG and other trainee representative bodies have been recognised and listened to. But our voices are actually being sought out for opinion. And that means I think there's a recognition that we have represented, you know, we represent an important group, but actually that we have something sensible to say. And if people are going to make decisions about us, actually they're much better to understand what the response to those decisions are going to be ahead of time than it would be finding out when they send out what previously were inadequate comms. And as Simon says, we're working quite hard on making them a bit more adequate. But the other thing is that the senior people in those meetings haven't been in a global pandemic before either. And they are doing all of this off principle and experience, but they've never been in this situation before. And so nobody has the rule book, nobody knows what they're meant to do. And we know that no decision will work for every individual. And so it's about, as you said, mitigating those decisions, making them as clear-cut and as flexible as possible to suit as many people as possible. But actually what we really need to try and encourage, and what we've been trying to encourage from a trainee perspective, is some medium and long-term planning. I think that's the other thing about my leadership journey, is actually trying to think about one step ahead about what it is that we have yet to do to make sure that the trainee voice and the trainee needs can start to be answered. And actually what we generally speaking need is a plan. We need to know ahead of time what is likely to happen to us. We need to know ahead of time what principles will be used and what policies will be put in place, so that we can actually be aware of that. And then that needs to get down to the trainee on the ground. It doesn't need to be in all of the rooms where all of these conversations are happening. It's actually how that gets conveyed through multiple different routes to the person sitting in a district general hospital in a rural community, and they will know when and where and how they're going to get redeployed, and how this will impact on their ARCP outcomes, and how on earth they're going to sit their exam at some point. So actually that conveyance of information is one of the things that I don't think we've done right yet. I think we are working really hard to make it better. And I think the use of social media, you know, certain groups, HE, GMC, have really recognised that social media is really important, but they haven't quite wielded the tool correctly yet, and they haven't quite worked out how to put that as part of their arsenal. And I hope with, you know, liaising with us more and more, and groups, not just the ATTG, but I think the other thing is about having multiple different trainee voices in a room is actually very important, coming from different angles with different mandates. You know, we've worked very closely with the BMA and other trainee groups during this time to understand that people need to hear a voice from different angles, and that actually that's the only way to understand the whole breadth of the issue. And I can't do what the BMA reps do, and they can't necessarily do what I do, because we've got different angles, and actually it's useful for different agencies to understand that and to get benefit from that. So I think that's the other thing. I think my last thing is about, we have to be pragmatic, and it's incredibly difficult to be pragmatic, and supporting trainees to be comfortable and to accept pragmatism is really difficult, because ultimately, because training is such a short period of time that we cram so much into, our lives are probably going to be affected by the pandemic more than any other doctor group in medicine, because actually we are the people that are meant to be in this 5-year training period learning how to be the doctors that we want to be for the rest of our lives. The consultants are tired, they're redeployed, they're exhausted, but they're also consultants in the field they already want to work in. And medical students and foundation trainees have been significantly affected, but actually trainee doctors are the ones that have had potentially 25% of their training moved around or dysregulated as a result of this pandemic. So how we get that back on track and making that a priority, not only for our educational bodies, but also for the government to understand that investing in training and how we do that and how we work with various different agencies that we liaise with to get that message to be an important one is the other thing about leadership. I think understanding how to raise the role of an institution that I think government just think will just continue to happen. You know, we need to be a priority because we are the doctors of the future, and at the moment we need to make sure that we have as much chance to be the best doctors that we can be, irrespective of what's happened to our training. And that needs investment, not just now, but it needs consideration and a long-term plan for the next few years of how we are going to recover from this monumental impact on training.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts, Anna. And I'm aware that these discussions are already happening about restoration of training. And there is a conference coming up in September with the Joint Royal College of Physicians, specifically on how we restore training for medical trainees, where we can share ideas and just create a plan for how we do restore training. But I do think that collaborative conversations with government need to happen and need to happen soon. And I don't think many politicians quite understand the cost of training a doctor. It's, well, you train them somehow and then they come out at the end, and that's that, isn't it? I think we have an incredibly high caliber of doctors in this country, and I think the reason why we use the resource within the NHS as well as we do is because we have people at that senior decision level, senior decision maker level, who are incredibly experienced and very well trained and can weigh up the resource benefit calculations that we do all of the time. Whereas other healthcare economies are much more expensive because, you know, the training time is a bit less, and so that sort of real senior decision making isn't as common, and it's a bit more protocol driven as well. So I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, you're so right. That guilt about like not being and doing enough, like, and do you know, because one of the things that I've been reflecting on recently is that I was really worried about getting pulled back in, and rather than actually kind of find out about it, I just started doing loads of locums to make myself feel better. So I was covering like nights at the weekend and then working my fellowship during the week. And then I was like, and I thought, and it was funny because a lot of the other fellows were talking about going back and how they didn't want to go back and things. And I felt really smug at first because I was like, well, I'm just, you know, doing both worlds. And then I realised actually, who was the fool here? Because I'm just plugging the guilt gap and actually not really sustainably doing anything.
At the beginning of the pandemic, I agreed to do 18 night shifts during April, but I you know, they were locum night shifts, and I'd agreed to do them, and it was going to help fund my PhD. And then I got taken off my OOP and redeployed, but I didn't feel like I could cancel the night shifts. So Anna will remember this. Like, I was doing long days at Nightingale, getting in my car, driving to work, doing my night shift, going back to Nightingale. And I was just doing that for a month and basically working 20-hour days because I didn't want to let down my hospital. I'd said I was going to be their registrar for the night, and I didn't want to let down Nightingale because I was part of one of the few trainees there and was doing all kinds of, it was a whole thing.
It's interesting as well, isn't it? It's interesting how you divide it into different things. So I kind of found myself in three very separate sort of situations, actually four if I include my normal working life, which is sort of a bit of a bystander. So I was doing this job, and this job was taking off, and I was having meetings daily. I think we were asked to create a serious numbers of documents and feedback about everything under the sun, at all hours of the day and night. And I was so pleased that we were being involved, and I felt we had such a strong voice to be listened to that we couldn't possibly, you know, there was never an option about doing that. That was what had to happen. And I was building relationships with an academy at the same time because I'd only taken over the role in November. And I remember my first telephone call was, so I'd had the conversation on the 30th of January, and then I had a telephone call with various academy people the 10th of February, and I was sitting outside in a car park thinking, oh Lord, this is going to be great. This is going to be really great. And sort of really developing, getting to know me, and whether they trusted me to be in those rooms, having those conversations as a senior representative academy, and building the relationship with the then president. And at the same time, locally, being sort of the most senior registrar. I've been in my post for quite a long time because of various PhD and baby related things. And we were moving our hospital in the middle of a pandemic, and the registrar and junior trainee body were really scared. And so I ended up sort of being doing quite a lot of leadership locally to reassure and to build SOPs and protocols, and to help that sort of happen, because I've been there for so long and knew how it all worked. And then I was also leading a trainee collaborative for research, and we realised that we needed to understand COVID in cancer patients. And so we set up this project overnight with about 4 of us, and with the support of the University of Birmingham and a massive team there. So I had all these things going on at the same time, because it just needed a response. And it was just every sort of one of those things needed a different thing from me as an individual. And it was quite interesting. The conversation I was having at national level, obviously, then the local sort of interpretation of what was happening in terms of COVID, plus then a research angle, was really fascinating, and actually really privileged to be a part of all of those things. But it was a real test of who am I today, what hat have I got on, and what do I need to think about in this moment, what meeting am I going to, and who does it impact. So that kind of juggling and that sort of multitasking thing that we all talk about, the beginning of COVID, that's what I felt like I was doing on a day-to-day basis, and it was really great for me in terms of development, and it was really important thing to do. But it did mean I had to really think about how I was going to balance that and take some time off. And Simon and I spent a lot of time emailing each other to basically make sure we were all right, and that we had dinner. And Addie and I were the same. And I think that was the thing about that support network, and about both having a local support network and a family. My family were amazing. My husband was outstanding and really supportive. And then actually, your representative buddies, the people who you do that with, it so makes a difference, because the executive within ATTG were phenomenal. That 3 guys I will always respect and really work closely with. And obviously Addie is sort of the chair of the committee that I still sit on, and representative of my tribe. Actually those people were instrumental to making sure that I could do those things as well. So it is so much about the support network that you build around you, both your seniors and your peers, that mean that you can do this and be able to meet those challenges and not go, oh God, I don't know what to do now. I mean, you still have moments like that, but you kind of get over them a bit more quickly as long as you've got the right supporting network in place.
And that's the nice thing about those oh God moments, because I've been in other, was it you who said it can be quite, or Addie maybe, that it can be quite lonely sometimes. And this is one of the few times where it's been both simultaneously very lonely at times, because you're having to make decisions that no one else can make. I've been in meetings where they've said harm is going to come to trainees, it's just about mitigating it, but harm will happen, sort of thing. But actually, when you have those oh God moments, it's the knowledge of knowing that you have someone to tap on the shoulder, and sometimes it's for advice, and sometimes it's just a sense check, a critical friend, did I do the right thing? And sometimes it's, can I just tell you about the shocker of a day, or the shocker of, I've just been in this meeting, whinge, and they go, that does sound awful. And you go, it was, moving on.
Yeah, but I think the other thing that's been really important is that this still happens to me. So I still get pulled acutely to the ward randomly on a day. So today was one of those days. So I had a meeting with Simon at the Academy, and I had a call to arms, and the ward needed me. I mean, there were more registrars on the ward than I think I've ever seen, so it was probably slightly unnecessary. But actually, that kind of, you need to respond to this clinically, and irrespective of everything else you're doing, actually, ultimately, you're a doctor on a ward, and we need you. And so that kind of quid pro quo, there's been a lot more understanding about that in terms of the people you represent with, but also the committees you go to. If you can't go today because of what's happening on the ground, then that's completely understood and accepted, and it should have been all along. But actually we've never been in a position where we can just randomly leave, and sometimes meetings at 2 till 3 on a Wednesday just don't suit, and you can't quite get 6 weeks worth of study leave notice. So that understanding that there is clinical pressures that we have to respond to has changed radically in this last year, and it so should be like that. And actually we represent each other and we support each other, because actually that is what happens. And some days the patient on the ward is the person and the only person that you can and need to concentrate on that day. But you need to make sure that you've got your backup in place so that doesn't impact on your representative roles and duties. And the way to do that is to support each other and to have that relationship, which means you can go, actually, this isn't going to happen today. I'll still be here at 7 o'clock at night. So could you do that? And I think we've all done that during this time and understood that actually there has to be a bit of flex. But actually what I've reflected on with that is that always needs to be there, because medicine's very demanding and quite unpredictable. And that's important to give yourself a support structure that allows you to have that flex, but still be able to lead and able to represent.
I don't actually think, in a weird way, COVID has thrown there's been unique challenges because of the specifics, but actually I don't think the fundamentals of any of it are new, and they shouldn't actually be things that should change in every aspect, from that most basic, it's okay to take a day off if you're unwell. For the first time ever, we've been discouraged to go in if you're unwell rather than the other way. I mean, whenever was that right? That we would always go in. And I remember one patient to me said in resus, "Love, you don't look well." And I checked my head, I had a raging tonsillitis. And I was like, when resus 4's telling you look ropey, it ain't a good day.
It's so very true.
It is, isn't it? And what craziness was that acceptable? But also, we always had a voice as the junior doctor. Our opinions were always important. We always understood the system better. It's just that such a big light has been shone on it, and actually everybody has really kind of stepped into those roles, haven't they? And as you say, it really isn't, it is you guys doing a fantastic level at the kind of really high system level, but it is actually every single FYI doctor that stepped into it. It's every single person that contributed or just owned a feeling and said, actually, I'm not feeling too well, and actually went and spoke to somebody else about that, because sharing that vulnerability probably means that next person can go and talk to somebody. I think it's just on such a big scale, and I just really do hope that actually we don't just default back to closing ranks. I kind of
that flattening of the hierarchy, and that not cessation, because it still happens, because my phone continuously tells me every day that it's still happening, but that reduction in infantilization of trainees, along with the flattening of the hierarchy, we need to hold on to that. The number of trusts who are like, look at us, we have asked our junior doctors what they want. And you're like, well, they were a third of your workforce. Why weren't you doing that before? But actually, if it takes a pandemic, then fine. It's happened. I wish it hadn't. But actually, like you say, Hannah, like none of these principles are new. It's just the pandemic has brought them to the surface and made them more non-optional, because otherwise the system would collapse.
And I think
it's interesting, isn't it?
I was going to say, I think there is something about unusual situations, difficult situations, situation of stress, that actually the people who have those leadership attributes step into the vacuum or step up to the plate. And what I think has been quite enlightening is within organisations that have been traditionally very hierarchical, some of the people that have actually stepped up and shown the ability to step up have not been the people who have been in that assigned leadership role. And I think there is something to reflect on leadership that you get because of a role that you are assigned, and leadership that you get because you engender the trust of other people. And that does not have to be in an assigned role at all.
No, I think that's really true. I think leadership doesn't have to have a name. It's more about an action, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's interesting though, because I think one of the things that is important is to be honest about it. I love what I do. You know, I have a slightly crazy life that most people would go, "What on earth?" But I love what I do. Like I really get something out of it. It sings to part of my personality and I want to do it well, and I want to make sure that it's doing it in a way that is perceived to be effective and representative in terms of the truth of the situation. But I really enjoy it. You know, I've always really enjoyed it, and I've really enjoyed it at every level, both in terms of geographical and you know, whether it's the granularity of having a conversation about, you know, the right way of running a rota, or whether it's about, you know, what we do about psychiatry recruitment, you know, actually massively different in terms of the stakes in the conversation, but the principles are the same. And I think leaders are showing themselves because they've decided that it's what they need to do to feel like they're doing their bit, and that they enjoy it, and that we want to do it well, and we want to make this frankly highly traumatic time as buffered as it possibly can be. I think one of the things about making decisions and what COVID has accelerated, and it has actually had some really positive impacts. You know, we're now currently recording a webinar that we never would have done like this 2 years ago. We would have all had to find a date in our diary, we would have all had to travel a long way, we would have probably had makeup on, or at least I would, maybe Simon as well, who knows, you know, and you know, we've done the work in a very different way. I definitely would, yeah, absolutely. But I think at the same time, we have to be really cognizant that people have been operating as if they're on a treadmill that won't turn off. And we've had to adopt a way of thinking about things, and a way of decision making, and a way of working that is responsive to the speed and pressure of the time. But what we now have to make sure is that as things do come under control, that we slowly step off that treadmill, or at least slow it down, and we evaluate the decisions that we've made. And some of them will stay. And the ones that say, actually, if you're sick, don't come to work, is a really important one that we should not go backwards on. And there will be a lot of things that actually have changed for the better. But one of the things I've learned throughout this pandemic is people need evidence. And we are an evidence-based population. We're trained to only do something if we have evaluated it and confirmed that it's the right thing to do. And we need to make sure that we are putting in and building processes which will allow us to do that, and understand whether what we've done in the last 18 months is something that is good and was good for the time, or was good and good to keep, or actually probably wasn't something that we wanted to continue, and we need to go back to the drawing board and think again. And there will be different things that fit into those three categories, but we need to make sure that we do that. We shouldn't just continue to accept the decisions we've made as the right thing to do. And one of the things that we do a lot in meetings when we go to as senior representatives is, how are we going to evaluate this? What process are we going to use to evaluate it? How are we going to communicate that evaluation? And how are we going to make sure that we then put it in the right frame to make a longer term decision? And those are things I think that as a trainee representative, I am really aware of, that it's important to make sure that decisions that were made for the right reasons at the right time aren't just adopted without making sure they're the right reasons for longer time.
Yeah. Thank you thanks a lot for those insights, Anna. And I think especially at the moment, decisions around recruitment, it's really important that we get those properly evaluated. And that's something that I know I'm pushing for within physician and IMT recruitment, and Simon in CST recruitment. I'm aware that there was some upset there recently.
Yeah,
so I just had a couple of questions to open up to the panel, if that's all right, just to get your views really. So one thought that I've had for a wee while is that in medicine we have the kind of academic fellowship route, and we have lots of
I suppose, respect and support for research. Do you think that leadership is given the recognition that it needs within our profession?
I don't think traditionally it is. I think unfortunately in lots of situations often the named leader or clinical director is the last person to sit down. But I think actually that's changing. And I think that's got to change with us. We have to lead that change and champion that leadership is just as important. I think what, like everything that we've said before, COVID has highlighted the need for it, but it hasn't invented the need for it. Every report from years and years ago now, and every report since then has highlighted consistently that leadership and good leadership and compassionate leadership is required. I think it needs personally to be embedded in training for every single trainee, so that when you do take over running a night shift or you step up to lead the take, that you have the skills and you're equipped to be able to manage that. We get trained to take blood, but we don't get trained to lead. Mm-hmm. Some will have natural skills in that area, but some people will need some development. But there is an expectation of us all as doctors to do that. I think then there's people who are naturally more affiliated to take those leadership roles and the trainee representative roles that you guys have, and that's almost like an extra strand, and that should be completely recognised, I think, alongside academic and medical education and the other different strands of medicine, because again, the skills that you bring to that and you learn from that are just as applicable, and actually I would say sometimes maybe more applicable than some of the academic things to your everyday practice as a doctor. And we should be supporting people to have those roles. We've seen Chris Whitty leading, and that is a role. He's a medic and he didn't get there by chance. And actually, why were we not training up a battery of Chris Whittys and people in different roles? Because actually everything that we've said throughout this, and Anna, you said it really clearly, is that we need to be able to influence the system, and we need to be influenced in government, and we need, I think personally, we need medics in those roles, because we can only speak from that medical experience. So it's a bit of a dual function. Mm-hmm. So yes, I completely think it does need to be recognised on that level.
Thank you for that. And I know, as when I stepped up to this national leadership role, I initially was 80%. In order to incorporate the role, I went up to 100%. I went up to full-time working in COVID, and it's actually been really hard juggling both. And I think if I was doing academic work, I might have been given the time. So Simon, you are an academic as well as a leader. So what do you think about that? What do you think about that question? Do you think leadership is given the recognition it deserves?
Absolutely not. I think, and that's the real problem. And I think it feeds into all the things that Hannah touched on, and quite a few things that Anna touched on. I think leadership is treated much in the same way that education is. It's not really seen as a professionalized role. It's seen as a hobby, a thing you do on the side. I think there's quite a lot of stigma around it, actually, if you're a trainee. I think that once one of my bosses said, if you were in an interview and someone said, well, what do you do? And you said, well, actually, also I'm a leader. Everyone would roll their eyes. But I think there's kind of big L and little L leadership. And I think that's the stuff that people try and get at in, selection and all the rest, but we don't really do it, because everyone has leadership roles in their day-to-day life, professionally and personally. There are times when you take charge in some way. And again, then there's the big L leadership roles, which HLA is involved in, and which all of us on this call are doing something with. And I think people have antibodies still culturally to trainees in those leadership roles. And so it's sort of marginalized and stigmatized a little bit. Like, you know, when you're old enough, when you're a big girl or boy, then you can be a real leader. But right now you're playing dress up as a leader. Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, you know what, actually, the last 12 or 18 months, I would suggest I've been doing it with a capital L. And I, you know, when you look at other organizations and communities where people are having to make leadership decisions, so high stress, high stakes, big capital L leadership decisions, and day-to-day pragmatic, you know, grassroots leadership decisions, they get trained in it explicitly. It is not just role modeling and hidden curriculum stuff. You go on courses and you are taught it, and you are taught how to delegate, and you are taught how to actively listen, and how to negotiate, and how to collaborate, and you are taught the bad kinds of leadership, you know, and the different styles, and when one style works and one style doesn't. And we're really not there yet, because again, much like education, which is my field, there is this perception that it's just kind of something we should all be able to do. Mm-hmm. You know, everyone should just be able to teach and lead, right? Because it's easy, because it's just teaching and leading. Mm-hmm. Like, yeah. And it's really not.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, organisations like the HLA and the Faculty of Medical Leadership and Management are trying to the voids that they're trying to fill, and I think they are doing great work. But it's about disseminating it to all trainees and doctors and non-training doctors, and actually your healthcare assistants can be fantastic leaders. I have definitely worked on wards where the healthcare assistant literally runs the ward, and nothing happens without their knowledge or say so. So, you know, it doesn't take a role to be a leader. It is, I think, attributes that you have. Any final thoughts or comments, Anna, on that question?
So I think absolutely that leadership is difficult to quantify. And I think that is the reason why recognition is difficult. Unless you are in a specific role and you can say you've done X for X amount of time, it becomes easier at that point. But I think one of the things that we really need to be aware of is that leadership is different things to different people. And you can be a leader. So my 5-year-old, most definitely the leader of my household, without a shadow of a doubt, closely followed by my basset hound. Definitely, I am well down the pecking order of leadership at home. But, you know, actually, there are so many different things. And not every trainee, not every doctor wants to be a leader. And not every trainee, not every doctor wants to be an educator. And you don't have to be if you don't want to be. But I think one of the things about getting leadership skills is it builds your confidence. And we have a lot of conversations in medical development and medical training about competence, not confidence. So often there's this conversation about, well, what if a trainee doesn't feel ready to progress through their training years? And what's often returned when we have that conversation is, well, yes, but they will be competent, they just won't feel confident. And that means that they should progress. And I feel like the thing that we're missing in that discussion is, if you are competent, you should be empowered to feel confident. And actually leadership skills sort of really speak to that part of you. They're the bit that you have to sit in a room and take a deep breath and go, I am definitely the most junior person in this room, but I do know what I'm talking about with regards to this particular issue. And whilst this person has been in medicine for 50 years and I've been in it for 5 years, they haven't been a trainee for 45 years. So therefore I actually am, I am the expert in the room about this particular situation. And it also teaches you transferable skills about things like how to, political awareness is really important, not in terms of the government and what they're doing, but how politics works in a room and in an agency and in a relationship. And that's a really key leadership skill, to understand how to navigate that landscape is really important. So those sort of soft, if you like, transferable leadership skills are the thing that I think we really need to focus on trying to engender within all of our trainees, not necessarily the next person to be the next medical director or the next person to be the next clinical director or head of HE. We need those people too. We need that group of Chris Whitties, but we also need somebody who goes, I can lead this quality improvement project and I can make delirium better for my elderly patients by introducing something relatively simple that's really effective. And I can go to a junior doctor forum and lead that junior doctor forum and chair a meeting. You know, actually chairing a meeting is a very difficult skill that we just assume people can do. And actually, you can't when you start, because actually how do you coordinate a rabble of people? But those are those things that you need. Yes, it's challenging, but you learn. But it's those things that's what we should be trying to empower within the leadership framework of all of our trainees. And then those that really like it and really enjoy it are the ones that then will want to take it further. But to lose the pleasure and enjoyment and to make it a grind means that, yeah, you're right. The person who is the clinical director is the one that didn't leave the room quick enough, because there's no joy in leadership quite often. It all just feels like hard work and stress and complaints and difficulty. And actually, it's how we give the flip side to that, so that when you need a new clinical director, they can understand that actually it's about making change and improving the situation, even for a small group of people, and to sort of have a different culture and to move things forward. And those things are hard work, but they're totally worth it. But often we can't in any way describe that when we're talking about leadership roles. So people who haven't got experience of them view them as a poison chalice, where actually they're a chance for opportunity, and we don't negate that or communicate that well enough, I don't think.
So thank you very much, Anna. You have very much preempted my final question. So obviously I think all of us ended up in our leadership roles before we knew the pandemic was coming our way. It was not on my tarot cards for sure. So my final question is, knowing what you know now, would you have still stepped up, and why?
Good
Great question.
Yeah.
So absolutely. I actually think that I will look back on this year as one of my proudest years. I've had the opportunity to work with an amazing group of people and to really, I hope, reinvigorate a group who weren't really working very cohesively together to a really cohesive and respected group of individuals who represent every specialty in the country. So it has been hard work. I have slept less than I've ever slept before, and I would definitely do it again.
Thank you, Anna. So Hannah?
So I guess I didn't really even answer the kind of very first question when you talk about kind of stepping up into a leadership role and kind of from the FMLM kind of chair sense. But actually I was already in that role, so I can't take any credit for stepping up during that time. But one thing that I would say that I think has been a real privilege and that I would definitely do again is it's been a really great opportunity to search around and see how other trainees have. So because we're not a representative body, we haven't had the privilege of being able to do that. But what we have done is being able to collate and find out what's been going on from lots of other different people. So we were able to conduct loads of interviews with different junior doctors. We've held, sessions at conferences where we found out from junior doctors about what they've been doing. We've ran surveys, and actually hearing those narratives has been amazing and such a privilege to hear about how trainees have stepped up, sideways, backwards, round, every single direction to manage the challenges that have come right now. And I think what my responsibility now is actually not through what's happened, but it's to share the learning from that. So I've been in a position where, I've been able to collate and hear and listen from so many different people, and to actually make sure that on behalf of the trainees that we keep championing that message, and that everything that we've just said and all that stuff. And I love Simon's little leadership with a little L and a big L, because they're actually, as Anna as well described, they're kind of two different groups. And I think what we all as trainees, but maybe particularly in my role now, is to really bang that drum of we need this for everybody, but we also need the support for those people who are taking on this, like the capital L leadership roles. So yeah, I think my challenge is actually, will I carry on with it now? And I feel so, even though tired like everybody else, actually really invigorated to kind of move all this forward now.
Thank you. And finally to Simon.
So it's interesting because I stepped down from the academy after 3.5 years in 21 days, and this has by far been the hardest, worst and best year of my leadership experience. When you join medical school, they always ask you why you want to be a doctor, and everyone says it's because you like science and you want to and you like people and blah 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 blah. And it's taken me years to realize that what it comes down to is I like fixing things. That's why I'm a pod. I like fixing things. I like helping people. I answer my phone. My partner finds it hilarious. I'm like, "Hi, I'm Simon. How can I help?" And it's not this weird patronizing thing. It's because I like helping people. I really do. I like fixing things. And this year has been an absolute dumpster fire. And yet I've been able to help and fix more than ever before. And it is this humbling privilege, but also unashamedly, I love it. Like I absolutely love it. And it's not because I'm, I love a crisis, and I love the fact that all these people are suffering and all this awfulness is happening. But I love being able to make other people's lives a bit better and take that road slightly less traveled, even if it's a little bit harder and a little bit tougher on me, because I get to go to bed at the end of that exhausting 29-hour day and know that I've fixed something or helped someone. So would I do it again? Absolutely, in a heartbeat.
Thank you. Well, I think on that note, I will finish the webinar just to say a huge thank you to you all for giving up your evening to discuss your journeys. I think there's so much that I've learned from all of you, and that we actually learned through this process all together, because we have all been muckling on through together and supporting each other. So thank you all for contributing this evening, and I wish you all the very best of luck with everything, and I'll probably see you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you to everyone that made tonight's episode possible. Whenever our scholars are thinking about complex problems facing our health systems, we encourage them to think about how they make significant change in the world of healthcare. We are incredibly lucky to have some incredible scholars in the HLA. They use the HLA as a platform to take their ideas and bring them to fruition. If you are interested in the work of the HLA, why not join us at one of our future HLA events? Why not join one of our programs? Why not even become a HLA scholar? Thank you for joining us. My name is Johan Marluna, the Director of the HLA, and it's a good night from all of us.